Hey, welcome back. Today's video is about bullet pointing. The when, the why, and the how of bullet pointing. If you are hunting animals with an open tip bullet, do not point them. Do not modify them. They were designed to perform as they come out of the box. Any change to that metplat diameter could be catastrophic to the terminal performance of the bullet, and it's not worth the risk. The benefit of pointing bullets is not big enough to make it worth doing. Just forget it. So for hunting, no pointing. The second one is short range shooting. Now, in short range shooting, we're talking from 100 to 500 yards. Guess what? There's not enough advantage to pointing bullets to make it worth doing. It just isn't there in my experience. I've shot F-class for over 10 years. And honestly, I quit shooting my pointed bullets inside of 600 yards a long time ago because it wasn't worth the time and effort to point the bullets properly, nor was it any advantage on target. So I just don't do it. From 600 on out, that's a different story. At 600, it's a maybe. But at long range, now we're able to see the differences that pointing makes. And that difference is in wind drift. If you're shooting longer ranges, past 600 yards regularly, there's an advantage there. And I think you should take advantage of it. That's just my opinion and is worth exactly what you paid for it. For those that aren't familiar with the process, bullet pointing is simply using a die and a press to reduce the diameter of the open tip of the bullet, the metplat. What does that do? Well, it increases the BC of the bullet. It also reduces the variation in the BC from bullet to bullet. How much does it increase BC? And how much does it reduce variation? A very small amount. We aren't going to turn some ping pong ball into some super bullet. It doesn't work like that. It's going to give you a small percentage of the total existing BC of the bullet. For example, the 180 grain hybrid in 7mm from Berger, I can increase that BC 6 to 7% on a bullet. But that particular bullet is an outlier. Most bullets are anywhere from 2% to 5% increase in BC, and it depends on what the metplat diameter was before you started pointing, because there's a limit to how small makes a difference. Below about 40 or 45 thousandths metplat diameter, there's no benefit to pointing anymore. Honestly, with a 6mm 105 grain VLD that has a metplat diameter of 52 thousandths, I can't detect any change in the vertical point of impact at 1,000 yards. So there's a very minimal change in BC, if any at all. The bullet you're using determines whether pointing them is going to make a difference in the BC at all. These differences in BC and in the variation of BC, what does that do for you as a shooter? Well, in F-class shooting, which is what I've been doing for the last 10 years, it gives you the chance, the opportunity to score one more point during a long aggregate. 1 point in a long aggregate. Because you will, at some point, fire that shot that's that 9.9999 shot that's a few thousandths outside of the line with unpointed bullets. Well, with pointed bullets, it might drag you into the line and get you that point. And that's what bullet pointing does. It improves your total ballistic performance to a point where you might pick up a point here or there, an X here or there. Now, I've recently switched from a wooden pointer to a Hoover pointer because I wanted to try out the Hoover. This Hoover die is using the B17 insert for the 180 grain 7mm Berger hybrid bullet. Why do I tell you which insert? Well, Hoover makes a lot of different inserts and a lot of people experiment with inserts. The first step to any pointing process is having a 0 point. Well, in order to have a 0 point, you have to have a bullet of a known length. In other words, before I point bullets, I must always sort the bullets by overall length. This does a couple of things. First, it tends to reduce the variation in BC from bullet to bullet if you keep them sorted after you're done. The second thing it does is it makes setting that die much easier because you have a very small window of bullet lengths to work with. Remember, we're crushing from the base of the bullet to the tip of the bullet, so the overall length controls how much crush we get. If we have huge variations in the overall length, we're going to get huge variations in the amount of deformation at the metplat. When I sort into what I call 3,000ths groups. For example, I would have 1.520, 1.521, and 1.522 in a single box. Yes, I know there's only 2 thousandths difference between the longest and the shortest. I call them a 3 thousandths group because I have 3 different indications. Now that we're at the press, we put the die in the press and we put the driving anvil into the ram. This is pretty simple. I'm not going to show it because, well, if you don't know how to do this, you probably can't size your brass. So first I zero the adjustment head and I back the stem all the way out, or out quite a ways. I now take my bullet and I insert it into the die and run the ram all the way up to hold the bullet in place. With the bullet in place, I screw the stem down until it won't turn with my fingers anymore. That's my zero position. This gives me a very consistent and easy way to reset the die each and every time to get the same results. Once that stem's all the way down, I just lock it down with a lock ring and away we go. It's time to start pointing bullets. I lower the ram and then put in the amount of point I want. For these 180 grain 7mm Berger hybrids, I'm going to put 30 thousandths of crush on them. There's a lot of variation throughout the community in how much crush they use. There's a lot of theories about what too much crush is and what not enough is. I'm going to leave that up to you. You decide what works for you. For this, I use 30 thousandths. I've used this for years, and I get a little bit of distortion to the bullets, and it doesn't seem to affect my outcomes at all. I'm going to lube the tip of the bullet. Now, I only lube about every 5th or 6th bullet because you don't need a lot of lube in there. I'm just using a little bit of Imperial dye wax just on the tip of my finger. I wipe it on the hollow point of the bullet and go for it. I distort the jackets, none in this case, and I get a perfectly good point. As a matter of fact, this point is somewhere between 51 and 47 thousandths in diameter. It's a little hard to measure with a caliper, but this is how I do it. I set the caliper to 51 thousandths and lock it down. Now I rub the bullet across the back of it. If the bullet sticks and holds go in both directions, well, guess what? You're less than 51 thousandths because the bullet entered the jaws. Now, when I set it down to 47 thousandths, you'll notice that it wants to skip out. That indicates that the Meplat is larger than 47 thousandths. It's somewhere between 47 and 51, and that is good enough for me. I know I hit my target. As an aside, I don't go anywhere near this tight with my Widden die. The Widden die doesn't like that. It tends to blossom the hollow point just a little bit if you get below about 53. So I set it a little bigger on the Widden die. So once I've got all of these bullets done, having lubed several of them, it's a really good idea to wipe them off when you're done to get that lube off of the outside surface of them so it doesn't end up in your necks. Now, when I go to the next group of bullets, all I do is I move the die 3 thousandths of an inch and keep pointing. You don't have to measure and set up each time, just set up once. I like to do it with the shortest ones and then slowly lengthen the die as I go. Okay guys, that's what I have for today. Setting up a bullet pointing die is not hard at all, and it's not a difficult or time-consuming process. If you're shooting F-class, this is the first thing I would recommend that you start doing once you figure out how to tune a rifle, because it will make a difference in your scores over an aggregate. And those little differences in the aggregate are what propel you to the top of the list. Until next time, shoot straight. Make sure you've got your processes down, and I'll see you in the next video.